The transport ship carrying Commander Sarah Chun and her delegation dropped out of faster-than-light travel above Axis Prime. And for a moment, everyone on the bridge fell silent. The capital world of the Galactic Consortium hung before them like a jewel, its surface covered in cities that glowed with colors no human eye had ever seen before. Rings of stations orbited the planet in perfect geometric patterns, and ships of 1,000 different designs moved between them without any visible traffic control. "How do they manage all that movement without collisions?" asked Lieutenant Morrison, staring at the viewport. "They don't manage it," replied Dr. Amar Okafor, the delegation's chief scientist. "From what we've learned, the Valthrex species controls gravity. They probably just move things with their minds." Sarah nodded slowly. 3 months had passed since humanity made first contact with the consortium, and every new piece of information made Earth scientists more uncomfortable. The galaxy wasn't empty. It was full of species that could do things humans had always thought impossible. The Valthrex controlled gravity with their thoughts, moving objects across rooms or crushing enemies with invisible force. The Ketera could phase through walls as easily as walking through a doorway. The Manos slowed down or sped up time around themselves, making them impossible to catch or fight. Each of the 12 founding species had some power that broke the normal rules of physics. And then there were humans, who could do exactly none of those things. A chime sounded on the bridge, and an alien face appeared on the main screen. It belonged to a Valthrex, though Sarah still found it hard to read their expressions. The creature had 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern and skin that shifted between purple and blue. "Human vessel. You are cleared for docking at reception station 7. A guide will meet you there." The transmission cut off without waiting for acknowledgement. "Friendly bunch," muttered Morrison. Sarah didn't respond. She'd read every report about the consortium's culture that Earth's diplomats could compile. The galaxy operated on a simple principle. Power meant status. Species with stronger abilities ranked higher. Those with weaker abilities served. After 10,000 years, this system had brought stability to 40,000 worlds. Humanity was about to enter that system at the very bottom. The docking process took an hour, mostly because their human-made ship had to navigate manually through traffic that other vessels handled with psychic commands or eye systems far beyond Earth's technology. When they finally exited through the airlock, a floating orb greeted them. "Welcome to Axis Prime," it said in perfect English, though Sarah suspected the orb was translating in real time. "I am your assigned guide. Please follow." The orb led them through corridors filled with aliens of every conceivable shape. Some walked on legs, others floated, and a few seemed to teleport short distances rather than moving normally. Sarah watched a Ketera walk straight through a support pillar without breaking stride. 2 Manos stood having a conversation, but they moved so fast they appeared as blurs, while everything around them stayed normal. "How are they doing that?" whispered Morrison. "Personal time fields," said Dr. Okafor. "They're living at a different speed than we are." The guide orb led them to a massive amphitheater where representatives from hundreds of species had gathered. The humans took their assigned seats near the back and waited. After what felt like an hour, but might have been much shorter given the Manos in attendance, a Valthrex floated to the center of the chamber without touching the ground. "The consortium recognizes the petition of the species called humanity for probationary membership," the Valthrex announced. His voice carried perfectly through the massive space without any visible speakers. "Let the assessment begin." What followed was the most humiliating experience of Sarah's life. Representatives from various species asked questions designed to catalog humanity's abilities. Could humans manipulate fundamental forces? No. Did humans possess psychic capabilities? No. Could humans alter their physical form? No. Enhanced senses? No. Natural weapons? No. Extended lifespan? No doubt the list went on and on. With each negative answer, Sarah watched the assembled aliens lose interest. Some started conversations with neighbors. Others simply left. Finally, a Menno spoke up, moving at normal speed for the benefit of the other species. If humans possess no notable capabilities, why should the consortium grant even probationary membership? Sarah stood up. This was the moment she'd prepared for, though no amount of preparation made it less daunting. We offer something different. We solve problems. The amphitheater fell silent, then filled with a sound Sarah eventually recognized as laughter. Problems are solved through power, said the Valthrex ambassador. Sufficient power makes any obstacle irrelevant. What you call problem solving, we call weakness. Then let us prove ourselves, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. Give us a problem you consider unsolvable. The Valthrex exchanged glances with several other ambassadors. They seemed to be communicating without words, probably through psychic means humans couldn't detect. Finally, the Valthrex turned back to Sarah. Very well. The consortium has written off Zone 447, a world designated for terraforming and colonization. 3 species have attempted to make it habitable. All failed. The soil is toxic. The atmosphere requires constant maintenance. Resources are scarce. Each species concluded that the power required to maintain a colony exceeded any benefit. And you want us to succeed where they failed? Asked Sarah. No, the Valthrex said flatly. We expect you to fail as well. But your failure will at least demonstrate that you attempted to contribute. The consortium will grant probationary membership to humanity. You may establish your colony on Zone 447. If you succeed, your status may improve. If you fail, you will serve in capacities better suited to your limited abilities. Sarah wanted to argue, to demand better terms, but she knew this was the only offer they'd get. We accept. The Valthrex made a gesture that the translation orb interpreted as dismissal. Your species has access to consortium trade networks and basic technology exchanges. A data package will be transmitted to your ship with details about Zone 447. The consortium expects to hear from you in one standard cycle. You are dismissed. The humans filed out of the amphitheater in silence. Only when they were back on their ship did Morrison finally speak. A toxic planet nobody else could fix. They're setting us up to fail. Of course they are, said Dr. Okafor. They think we're worthless. This is their way of keeping us busy while the real powers run the galaxy. Sarah looked out the viewport at the glowing planet below. At the ships moving in impossible patterns, at the casual display of powers that humanity would never possess. Then she smiled. Let them think that. We didn't come here to be like them. We came here to be ourselves. She turned to her crew. Get me every piece of information about Zone 447. Soil composition, atmospheric data, mineral surveys, everything. Then wake up the colonists. What are you thinking? Asked Morrison. I'm thinking that these aliens have spent 10,000 years using power to solve everything. They've forgotten that some problems don't need power. They need patience, planning, and a willingness to work with what you have instead of forcing what you want. Sarah's smile widened. They've forgotten how to actually solve problems. But we haven't. The ship began its journey to Zone 447. Carrying 5,000 sleeping colonists and a crew that knew they had something to prove. Behind them, Axis Prime glowed in the darkness, beautiful and confident in its power. Ahead lay a world that had defeated species with abilities beyond imagination. Humanity didn't have power, but they had purpose. And sometimes, purpose was enough. The first thing that hit them when they entered Zone 447's atmosphere was the smell. Even through the ship's filters, Something acrid and bitter crept into the air. Dr. Okafor checked her instruments and shook her head. Sulfur compounds in the atmosphere. The previous colonization attempts probably tried to scrub it all at once. She pulled up old reports from the 3 failed attempts. Yes, look at this. The Karathi used atmospheric processors powered by their crystalline energy matrices. Worked for about 6 months, then the processors broke down. The replacement cost was apparently too high. Sarah studied the landscape below as they descended. Zone 447 looked like a wasteland. Gray soil stretched in every direction, broken only by rock formations and dried river beds. No plants, no visible water, nothing that looked even remotely welcoming. The Bandari tried next, continued Dr. Okafor. They're silicon-based life forms who can survive in toxic environments. But even they couldn't grow food here. Something in the soil kills everything they planted. What about the 3rd attempt? Asked Morrison. The Yilith. They're basically living plants themselves. Can photosynthesize and extract nutrients from almost anything. They lasted 8 months before giving up. Said the soil was, quote, fundamentally hostile to biological processes. The ship touched down on a flat area that sensors indicated was stable. Through the windows, the crew could see the ruins of previous attempts. Abandoned buildings, broken machinery, and the shells of failed atmospheric processors dotted the landscape. Well, said Sarah, at least we have shelter. The next 3 weeks were brutal. They set up camp in one of the old Karathi structures, which at least kept the toxic atmosphere outside. The 5,000 colonists woke from cryosleep in shifts, each group given immediate tasks. No time was wasted. Sarah divided the colony into teams. One group analyzed the soil, taking samples from hundreds of locations. Another studied the atmosphere in detail. A third examined the water sources, which were contaminated but at least present. A 4th team reviewed every scrap of data from the failed attempts. Commander, look at this, called Dr. Okafor one evening. She'd been studying soil samples for days. The previous species all tried the same approach. They wanted to neutralize the toxins using their various powers. The Karathi tried energy-based purification. The Bandari tried molecular restructuring. The Yilith tried biological conversion. And it didn't work, said Sarah. Right, but here's the interesting part. They were trying to change the entire planet at once. Massive, power-intensive solutions. Dr. Okafor pulled up a microscopic image. But the soil isn't uniformly toxic. Some areas are worse than others. The toxins are concentrated in certain layers. And look at this. There are microorganisms that actually feed on some of the toxic compounds. Sarah leaned closer. So we don't need to purify everything at once. Exactly. We work in stages. First, we identify the least toxic areas and start there. We introduce earth bacteria that can break down some compounds. We use the native microorganisms that already handle others. We test different crops in controlled environments. We build up slowly instead of trying to force a solution. It sounded tedious. It sounded slow. But it also sounded possible. Over the next 6 months, the colony transformed from a desperate outpost into something resembling a functioning settlement. They used the old buildings, repairing them not with advanced technology, but with basic construction techniques. Where the Karathi had tried to power everything with energy matrices, humans installed simple solar panels and wind turbines. The agricultural team made breakthrough after breakthrough. They discovered that certain earth plants, combined with specific bacteria, could actually improve the soil over time. Not quickly, but steadily. Each successful crop made the next one easier. They rotated fields, letting some rest while others grew. They composted organic waste to enrich the soil. It's basic agriculture, explained Dr. Martinez, the lead botanist. Techniques humans have used for thousands of years. The other species never needed to learn this because they could just force the soil to support whatever they wanted. But force doesn't last. This does. The atmospheric problem proved harder. The sulfur compounds kept returning, generated by geological activity deep underground. The previous species had tried to scrub the atmosphere constantly, a power-intensive solution that eventually became unsustainable. "We can't stop the sulfur from being released," said Dr. Okafor. "But we don't need to. We just need to manage it." They built simple scrubbers near the main colony, enough to keep the immediate area breathable. They planted modified algae in the water sources that absorbed some atmospheric toxins. They designed buildings with natural ventilation that filtered air without requiring constant power. The air would never be perfect, but it didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be livable. By month 8, the colony was growing its own food. By month 10, they'd expanded to 3 separate growing zones. By month 12, they were actually producing surplus. That's when the consortium observers arrived. 2 Valthrax and a Ketera materialized outside the main colony building. Sarah had been expecting them. The consortium had said they'd check in after 1 standard cycle, and here they were, probably expecting to find failure. Sarah met them at the airlock. "Welcome to New Providence Colony." The lead Valthrax looked around with his 4 eyes, clearly confused. "Your structures are still standing." "Yes. Where are your atmospheric processors?" "We don't use them." "Come on, I'll show you around." The tour lasted 3 hours. Sarah showed them the agricultural zones, explaining crop rotation and soil enrichment. She showed them the natural air filtration systems. She demonstrated the water purification setup that used simple physics instead of advanced technology. The observers said nothing, just watched with expressions Sarah couldn't read. Finally, the Valthrax spoke. "This is not possible. 3 species with far greater capabilities failed here. You possess no powers, no advanced technology. How are you succeeding?" "We're not using power," Sarah explained. "We're using process. The other species tried to force solutions. We adapted to what was here and worked with it instead of against it. Adaptation is what lesser species do when they lack the power to shape their environment," said the Ketera, speaking for the first time. "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But it works. We're not just surviving here. We're thriving. In another 6 months, we'll have enough surplus food to trade. In a year, we could support twice our current population." The Valthrax exchanged glances, that silent communication again. "The consortium will need to verify your claims. We will return with additional observers." They left without another word, phasing or teleporting back to their ship. "Well," said Morrison, "that went better than expected." "Or worse," Sarah replied. "We just proved that their way isn't the only way. That's either going to interest them or threaten them." Word spread faster than Sarah anticipated. Within weeks, representatives from other species began arriving at Zone 447. Some came out of curiosity. Others came with problems. The Manos sent a delegation with a theoretical physics problem they've been struggling with for decades. Something about paradoxes in temporal manipulation that their mathematicians couldn't resolve. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a physicist from the colony, spent 6 weeks working on it. She didn't manipulate time or use any advanced technology. She just used math, breaking the problem into smaller pieces, testing each piece, and building up to a solution. When she presented her work, the Manos were stunned. "You solved the Kronos paradox with mathematics alone?" asked their lead scientist. "Yes," Yuki replied. "You were trying to solve it by manipulating time itself, but that's what created the paradox." The solution required understanding the underlying principles without directly interacting with them. More problems arrived. A Karathi mining operation needed help with efficiency. Human engineers showed them how to calculate optimal extraction patterns instead of just using energy to blast through rock. A Bandari medical facility wanted to improve their success rates. Human doctors introduced something they called a systematic diagnostic process. Sarah watched it all happen with growing amazement. Humanity wasn't teaching aliens to be human. They were teaching aliens to think differently, to approach problems methodically, to break complex challenges into manageable pieces. "Commander," said Dr. Okafor one evening, 6 months after the consortium observers' first visit, "I've been tracking something interesting. 17 different species have contacted us in the past month, asking for what they're calling the human method. They want to learn how we solve problems without using power." Sarah looked out at New Providence Colony, at fields of green growing in soil that was supposed to be dead, at buildings that worked with the environment instead of fighting it, at 5,000 humans who'd succeeded through nothing more than patience and planning. "Maybe power isn't everything," Sarah said quietly. Maybe they're finally starting to realize that. What she didn't know was that in the halls of the consortium's High Council, a very different conversation was taking place. The old powers were watching humanity's rise with growing concern. For 10,000 years, the hierarchy had been clear. Power determined status. The strong ruled, the weak served. But humans were breaking that hierarchy without even trying. They were proving that problems could be solved without power. And if power wasn't necessary, then what justified the old order? Some council members saw opportunity. Others saw a threat. And one of them, a Valthrex named Cormith, was already planning how to put humanity back in their proper place. The galaxy was about to change, but nobody knew it yet. The alert came at 0300 station time, waking Sarah from the first decent sleep she'd had in weeks. The message was marked urgent priority, transmitted across the entire consortium network simultaneously. She pulled up the broadcast and felt her blood run cold. "Attention all consortium worlds. An unknown entity has entered our galaxy. Initial contact resulted in the complete loss of the Thoros system. All 17 planets, 4 billion inhabitants, gone. The entity is designated codename Devourer. All species are advised to prepare defensive measures." Morrison burst into her quarters moments later. "Did you see it?" "I saw it." Sarah was already pulling up whatever data she could access. 4 billion people. Just gone. Over the next 3 days, more information trickled through the network. The Devourer was massive, larger than most space stations, and it moved through space at speeds that should have been impossible. It seemed to be made of energy itself, constantly shifting and changing form. And every time the consortium military tried to stop it, the creature grew stronger. The Valthrex had hit it with gravity weapons that could crush mountains. The Devourer absorbed the energy and moved faster. The Karathi fired their crystalline energy beams, powerful enough to crack planets. The Devourer fed on it like fuel. Even the Menos, who tried to trap it in temporal fields, found their powers reversed and sent back at them. "It's eating everything we throw at it," reported Dr. Okafor, listening to consortium military channels. "Every attack makes it stronger. It's consumed 7 systems now. The death toll is in the tens of billions." New Providence Colony watched the reports with growing horror. This wasn't their fight. Humanity was barely a probationary member, given the worst territory and the lowest status. They had no obligation to help, no expectation of being involved. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about it. 4 billion people in the first attack. Tens of billions now. And the consortium's response was the same every time. More power. Bigger weapons. Stronger attacks. All of which fed the creature. "They're doing the same thing," she muttered. What? Asked Morrison. They're doing the same thing they always do. They're trying to overpower the problem. It's not working, but they keep doing it because it's all they know. She pulled up everything she could find about the Devourer's attacks. Where it went, how long it stayed, what it consumed. There had to be a pattern. There was always a pattern. 3 days later, an emergency transmission came through. The Consortium High Council was convening an unprecedented session, and they were requesting representatives from all member species, including humanity. Sarah took Morrison and Dr. Okafor and caught the next transport to Axis Prime. The amphitheater was packed when they arrived. Every species had sent delegates, and the mood was something Sarah had never seen before in the confident, powerful consortium. Fear. The Valthrex High Counselor floated to the center. The Devourer has destroyed 12 systems. Our combined military forces have failed to stop it. Current projections show it will reach the core systems, including Axis Prime, within 14 standard days. We have called this session to coordinate a final defensive effort. Final? Someone called out. That sounds like you expect to lose. We do not expect victory, the Valthrex admitted, and shocked silence filled the chamber. But we will not surrender without resistance. We are consolidating our most powerful weapons for a coordinated strike. If we can channel enough energy at once, we may be able to overwhelm the entity before it can adapt. Sarah stood up. That won't work. Every eye in the amphitheater turned to her. The Valthrex's expression was cold. Human Commander Chun, your species has been in the consortium for barely 2 standard cycles. What could you possibly know about fighting entities of this magnitude? I know that you're repeating the same strategy that's failed 12 times. You're trying to overpower it. But every time you use power against it, it gets stronger. You're feeding it. Then what do you suggest? The Valthrex's tone made clear he expected no useful answer. Stop trying to destroy it. Start trying to understand it. The amphitheater erupted in arguments and dismissals. But one voice cut through the noise. A Mano scientist named Vareth, who'd worked with Dr. Tanaka on the Chronos Paradox. Let the humans speak, Vareth said. Their methods have proven effective before. Sarah took a breath. We need to figure out what it is, what it wants, and what its limitations are. You're treating this like a battle. But what if it's not an attack? It has killed billions, the Valthrex snapped. I know. But has it shown any sign of intelligence? Any attempt to communicate? Or is it just consuming energy wherever it finds it? That brought pause. The Valthrex consulted with other counselors. There have been no communications. It simply arrives in a system, consumes all energy it encounters, and moves on. Like it's feeding, Sarah said. What if it's not evil? What if it's just hungry? What difference does that make? Demanded a Karathi delegate. All the difference. If it's an attacker, you fight it. If it's a creature that's starving, you feed it something else. The debate lasted hours. Most of the consortium wanted to proceed with their planned attack. But a growing minority, led by Vareth and surprisingly backed by some of the younger Valthrex, wanted to try Sarah's approach. Finally, the High Council agreed to a compromise. They would send a small research team to study the Devourer's behavior while the military prepared their final strike. Sarah volunteered to lead the research team. So did Dr. Okafor, Dr. Tanaka, Morrison, and to everyone's surprise, Vareth and 3 other alien scientists who'd worked with humans. You understand this is probably suicide, Vareth said as they boarded the research vessel. Probably, Sarah agreed. But standing on Axis Prime while that thing eats its way here is definitely suicide. At least this way, we might learn something useful. They caught up to the Devourer at the edge of the Kelmer system. It was terrifying. A massive swirling energy the size of a moon, constantly changing colors and shapes. Tendrils of power stretched out from it, pulling in anything with energy. Ships, stations, entire planets. Maintain distance, Sarah ordered. No active scans. Nothing that uses significant energy. We just watch. For 3 days, they observed. They watched how it fed, what it consumed first, how long it stayed in each location. Dr. Okafor noticed something. It's not eating everything equally. Look, it went straight for the power stations. Then the ships. Then the populated planets. It's prioritizing high-energy sources. Because it's desperate, said Dr. Tanaka. Look at the pattern. It's not being efficient. It's gorging itself, trying to consume as much as possible as fast as possible. That's not the behavior of a predator. That's the behavior of something starving. Can you track where it came from? Asked Sarah. Dr. Tanaka worked for hours, backtracking the devourer's path through the galaxy. Finally, she found it. There, it entered our galaxy from an intergalactic void. That region has almost no stars, no energy sources. If it evolved there, then our galaxy must seem like an endless buffet, Sarah finished. It's been starving its entire life, and suddenly it found more food than it ever imagined existed. So how do we stop it? Asked Morrison. We don't stop it, Sarah said slowly, an idea forming. We feed it. They transmitted their findings to the consortium. The response was skeptical but desperate. They had 7 days before the Devourer reached core systems. The military strike was planned for day 6. Give us until day 5, Sarah pleaded. If we're wrong, you lose 1 day. If we're right, you save trillions of lives. The consortium agreed, though Sarah suspected it was more that they'd run out of other options. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. They needed to create an energy source so appealing that the Devourer would choose it over inhabited systems. And it needed to be sustainable, something that could keep feeding the creature indefinitely. The solution came from an unlikely source. A Karathi engineer named Vel, working with human physicist Dr. Rodriguez, designed what they called a stellar tap. By using both Karathi crystal technology and human engineering principles, they could extract energy directly from a star's corona and concentrate it in a sustained field. It will provide massive amounts of energy continuously, Val explained. More than any inhabited system, and it won't run out for millions of years. But we need to install it in an uninhabited system, Sarah added. Somewhere the Devourer can feed without hurting anyone. They chose the Chronos system, a binary star pair with no planets and no inhabitants. Working around the clock, human engineers and alien specialists built the stellar tap in 4 days. It was the most intense cooperation anyone had ever seen. Species with powers working alongside species with planning, combining their strengths. On day 5, the stellar tap activated. Energy poured out of the binary stars, concentrated into a beacon that blazed across space. The Devourer, now only 2 days from Axis Prime, paused. It's detected the energy, reported Dr. Okafor from the research ship. The Devourer changed course. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, it moved toward Chronos. Sarah held her breath as the creature approached the stellar tap. The Devourer reached out with its tendrils, touched the concentrated energy, and began to feed. But this time, something different happened. The creature slowed. It settled into a stable orbit around the tap. Its frantic, desperate movements calmed. It's working, whispered Dr. Tanaka. Look at its energy signature. It's stabilizing. They watched for 20 hours. The Devourer continued feeding, but it didn't move on. It didn't search for more. It had found what it needed. A transmission came from Axis Prime. The Valthrex High Counselor appeared on screen, his 4 eyes showing something Sarah had never seen before. Humility. Commander Chen, your solution appears successful. The entity has ceased its advance. How did you know this would work? We didn't, Sarah admitted. But we knew that doing the same thing that failed 12 times wouldn't suddenly succeed on the 13th. Sometimes the answer isn't more power. Sometimes it's understanding what you're really facing. The Vothrex was silent for a long moment. The Consortium owes humanity a debt. We will discuss your species status when you return to Axis Prime. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood before the High Council again. But this time, the amphitheater was full of species who'd come to listen, not dismiss. The ceremony took place in the Grand Hall of Axis Prime, a chamber so vast that its ceiling disappeared into artificial clouds. Representatives from all Consortium species gathered, filling seats that rose in tiers around the central platform. Sarah stood there with her delegation, trying not to show how nervous she felt. The Vothrex High Counselor floated down to the platform. His name was Cormath, and Sarah had learned he was one of the oldest beings in the Consortium, over 800 years old. He'd seen empires rise and fall. He'd helped establish the very hierarchy that humanity had challenged. Commander Sarah Chun, Cormath began, his voice carrying through the hall without amplification. Your species arrived in this chamber 2 cycles ago as petitioners for probationary membership. You possessed no powers, no abilities that would grant status in our traditional hierarchy. We assigned you an impossible task, expecting failure. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though she wanted to point out that setup had been fairly obvious. Instead, Cormath continued, you succeeded where species with far greater capabilities failed. You terraformed Zone 447 using methods we had forgotten or never learned. When representatives asked for your help, you taught them approaches we hadn't considered. And when the greatest threat our galaxy has faced in 10,000 years emerged, you provided the solution that saved trillions of lives. The hall was absolutely silent. Sarah could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching her. The High Council has deliberated. Humanity is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Consortium. Cormath paused. Furthermore, we extend an invitation for humanity to join the High Council itself. The hall erupted. Species argued with each other, some supporting the decision, others clearly opposed. Sarah stood frozen. Full membership was what they'd hoped for. But a council seat? That was unprecedented for such a young species. Cormath raised a hand, and silence fell again. Some will say this violates 10,000 years of tradition. That power determines rank. That only the strong should guide the many. His 4 eyes fixed on Sarah. But humanity has taught us something we had forgotten. Strength without wisdom leads to repeated mistakes. Power without purpose becomes its own weakness. We have become so accustomed to solving problems through force that we'd lost the ability to think around them. A Manos counselor, Vareth, who Sarah recognized from the research mission, spoke up. The human approach nearly failed. The Devourer could have destroyed everything before a stellar tap was completed. Yes, Sarah said, speaking for the first time. It was a risk. But your approach had already failed 12 times. We offered a different way, not because ours was guaranteed to work, but because doing the same thing repeatedly while expecting different results is itself a failure. And what makes humanity qualified to guide the Consortium? Demanded a Karathi counselor. You've been members for mere cycles. Many species here have millennia of experience. Sarah took a breath. This was the moment that would define humanity's future in the galaxy. We're not claiming to be better than anyone here. We're not saying our way is the only way. What we're offering is perspective. Every species in this hall has incredible abilities we'll never possess. You can manipulate gravity, phase through matter, bend time itself. Those are gifts humanity will never have. She looked around the hall, meeting eyes and sensors and whatever aliens used to see. But because we didn't have those gifts, we had to develop something else. We had to learn to observe, to analyze, to break problems into pieces we could handle. We had to learn patience because we couldn't force solutions. We had to learn cooperation because no single human could survive alone. The consortium doesn't need less power, Sarah continued. It needs to combine power with process. Imagine what could be achieved if the Karathi energy manipulation was directed by systematic planning. If Valthrek's gravity control was applied through calculated engineering. If Mano's temporal abilities were guided by methodical research. Vareth stood. The human speaks truth. When Dr. Tanaka helped solve the Chronos paradox, she didn't replace our temporal powers. She showed us how to think about the problem differently. The solution required both her mathematical approach and our ability to test theories through time manipulation. Neither could have succeeded alone. Other voices joined in, species that had worked with humans over the past cycles. A Karathi engineer described how human efficiency methods had improved their mining operations. A Bandari doctor explained how systematic diagnostics had increased their medical success rates. A young Valthrek scientist talked about learning to ask not just, "Can we do this?" but "Should we and how?" The debate lasted for hours. Sarah's legs ached from standing, but she didn't dare sit while the consortium decided humanity's fate. Finally, Cormath called for a formal vote. All those in favor of granting humanity full membership and a seat on the High Council? Lights appeared throughout the chamber as species voted. Sarah couldn't tell if it was enough. All those opposed? More lights, but fewer. The motion passes. Humanity is granted full membership and a council seat. The hall filled with a mixture of cheers, protests, and what might have been the alien equivalent of shocked silence. Sarah felt Morrison grip her shoulder in support. Dr. Okafor was openly crying. But Cormath wasn't finished. There's one more matter. The stellar tap that saved our galaxy requires maintenance and monitoring. It must be protected from those who might try to weaponize such concentrated energy. The Devourer must be studied to ensure it remains stable and to learn from an entity unlike any we've encountered. The High Council proposes the creation of a new consortium institution, a multi-species research and development facility dedicated not to increasing power but to developing better methods of applying existing powers. This facility will be called the Institute for Systematic Solutions. He turned to Sarah. Commander Chun, we would like humanity to lead this institute. Sarah blinked. Lead it? Your species understands something we are only beginning to relearn. That every problem, no matter how complex, can be broken down and solved with the right approach. The Institute will teach this methodology to all species while also learning from each species' unique capabilities. It will be a place where power and purpose combine. Sarah looked at her delegation. Morrison was grinning. Dr. Okafor nodded encouragement. Dr. Tanaka gave a small smile. They'd come so far from that first humiliating meeting, when humanity had been dismissed as powerless and irrelevant. We accept, Sarah said. On one condition. Cormath's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. You bargain even now? Not a bargain. A principle. The Institute must be open to all species, regardless of their power level or status. The servitor species, the low-ranked, everyone. If we've learned anything, it's that good ideas can come from anywhere. For a moment, Cormath said nothing. Then he made a gesture Sarah had learned meant respect. Agreed. Let it be recorded that the Institute for Systematic Solutions is open to all consortium species and is led by humanity, not through power, but through demonstrated ability. The ceremony ended with formal declarations and what passed for celebration among dozens of different species. But Sarah found herself on a balcony overlooking Axis Prime, needing a moment of quiet. Cormath appeared beside her, floating a few inches off the ground. You are wondering if this will last. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. Change is hard. Tradition is strong. There are species in that hall who think humanity is a threat to everything the consortium stands for. They are correct, Korma said, surprising her. You are a threat to the old order. You've proven that power alone is insufficient. That threatens those whose status rests entirely on their abilities. He paused. But sometimes things must be threatened to survive. The consortium had grown complacent. We solved every problem the same way, and when that failed, we simply applied more power. The Devourer would have destroyed us because we couldn't think differently. You're taking a huge risk, putting humans on the council. Yes, Korma's four eyes studied her. But you took a risk coming here with nothing but determination and ideas. You took a risk trying to terraform a world everyone said was impossible. You took a risk approaching the Devourer with understanding instead of weapons. It seems appropriate that we take a risk on you. He started to leave, then turned back. A question, Commander. What would humanity have done if the stellar tap had failed? If the Devourer had ignored it and continued to Axis Prime? Sarah was quiet for a moment. We would have tried something else. And if that failed, something else again. We would have kept trying different approaches until we found one that worked or ran out of time. Because giving up wasn't an option, and repeating the same failures would have been pointless. That, Korma said softly, is what makes your species dangerous, and valuable, and necessary. You don't accept failure as final. You accept it as data. He floated away into the gathering dusk. Sarah stayed on the balcony, looking out at a city built by power she'd never possess, now partially shaped by ideas her species had contributed. Ships moved through the sky in their impossible patterns, but now some of those patterns had been optimized by human traffic management algorithms. Buildings glowed with energy, but some of that energy was being used more efficiently, thanks to human engineering principles. Morrison found her there an hour later. There you are. The council wants to meet tomorrow to start planning the institute. They're asking what we need. Everything, Sarah said. Labs, classrooms, research facilities. But most importantly, we need teachers from every species. We're not here to teach the galaxy to be human. We're here to help every species discover what they can do when they combine their natural abilities with systematic thinking. That's ambitious. It is, Sarah smiled. But 2 years ago, they told us terraforming Zone 447 was impossible. Last month, they said the Devourer couldn't be stopped. Maybe impossible just means nobody's found the right approach yet. They stood together, watching Axis Prime prepare for night. Somewhere in the Kronos system, the Devourer fed peacefully from the stellar tap, monitored by a multi-species team. Somewhere on Zone 447, crops grew in soil that had been declared dead. And somewhere in the consortium's vast network, species were beginning to ask questions they'd never considered before. Not just, can we do this? But how should we do this? Not just, how much power do we need? But what's the most efficient approach? Not just who is strongest, but how can we work together? Humanity had entered the galaxy as the weakest species, possessing no powers and no status. But they'd brought something the galaxy had forgotten it needed: purpose, method, the willingness to try, fail, learn, and try again. The aliens had power. They could bend reality to their will, manipulate fundamental forces, and reshape worlds with thought. But humans had purpose. They solved problems. They planned. They persevered. And now they would teach a galaxy of gods to think like builders instead of forces of nature. It wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, failures. Some species would never accept that power wasn't enough. The old hierarchies would fight to maintain themselves. But change had begun. And once started, It was as inevitable as the human tendency to look at something impossible and ask, but what if we tried this? Sarah Chun, commander of humanity's first delegation to the stars, looked out at a galaxy full of powers she would never possess. And she smiled, because she didn't need those powers. She had something better. She had a plan.